Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Welcome to another Word in Your Ear and the second edition in this sumptuous series of album sleeve-sized books that are celebrating and telling the story of Island records. This one from 1969 to 1970. So Dave and I have been transported back to our teenage selves, Free and King Crimson, Fairport and Nick Drake. And it's edited by Neil Storey. Neil, it's lovely to see you, who's joining us from France.
Good morning. How are you?
We're very well indeed. And we thoroughly enjoyed talking to you last year when we did the first edition. And just to remind people, this involves press clippings and tickets and artwork and sleeves and interviews about all the records that came out in this particular period. This is 69 to 70. Now, is that very difficult to assemble?
It's an ever ongoing process, really. Is it difficult? It's a case of scheduling people when they want to talk to you, if they want to talk to you. Hopefully they do want to talk to you. And also, we're all getting on, and everybody who's involved in those albums is older. And unhappily, we're facing a situation where people, and I don't wish to start the whole sort of today's proceedings off on what Neil from the Young Ones would call a downer, but people are dying. It's as simple as that. People are passing in front of it. And it's a whole musical generation that is disappearing. And
all the more reason why you should be telling this story. But surely everyone you get in touch with who was involved in some capacity with making these records must be so pleased that you're doing this and you're getting a chance to talk about these records again.
Well, I think initially people were a bit bemused. Why would you want to do something like this? Because it's almost like the never-ending project. Somebody asked me the other day, how many books are there going to be? It's going to be 4, isn't it? And I went, no, it'd probably be 10.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. The plan is that we go to 1989. So it encompasses the entirety of the analog age of Ireland. It's never been done before with any record label on the planet. So
it outstrips Mark Lewison's efforts to chronicle the Beatles by many
Mark
volumes.
Lewison
He's a part-timer. He's an amateur.
Lightweight, we all know that, Mark Lewison.
No, not at all. I mean, he's a genius, and I have his, hugely heavy. I mean, you think my books are heavy or our books are heavy? God,
this is pretty heavy.
It is.
This one's pretty heavy.
3.75 kilos.
Yes, it is.
We've weighed it. And actually the next one, because we're already on to volume 3.
Best to use second post.
Yeah. Volume 3 is 1971 to 72. So it's another 2-year epic. And I think it's going to be even bigger.
Well, look, we picked out a few things here from this vast riches in this volume to talk about in detail, because it gives you an idea of how the book works. And I think we're starting here, aren't we, Mark? With Spooky 2.
I thought it'd be good to start there because the book begins with what you could say was kind of the elements of the previous Island. So that's the Unfolding Book of Life, which is a compilation about old gospel tunes, and there's a blues compilation. There's a fabulous record, An Electric Storm by Delia Derbyshire. But what we wanted to start by the moment when the new dawn of the kind of hippie underground comes in. And I suppose the first example of that really is the Spooky Tooth record, Spooky 2.
Well, the first 2 actually would be the Free album, and the Spookies album. I think the second Spookies album, this is just me personally, I think it eclipsed the first spooky album. It's when they really kind of came of age, if you like. It's also, in terms of the cover, it's one of the great covers. There's no question about that.
Now you
It's
did
a fantastic
different.
cover.
You did different versions of this cover. Is that
There were
right?
five different versions.
colours.
Yeah.
Which is
I mean,
extraordinary when you think that it was a kind of marginal underground record, really, wasn't it, in its day?
No, I wouldn't say it was marginal.
Well, did it get in the chart? Did it get in the chart?
I couldn't offhand tell you. Maybe
Right.
it did, maybe it didn't. But it was certainly. I remember talking to David Betteridge about it, and he said we had this great idea. We do it in 5 colours, and then that actually they weren't quite big enough to carry 5 covers, so 5 different coloured covers. So it confused the record shop. So maybe that's why it didn't get into the charts. But it should have done. Green one, purple one, blue one, brown one.
It's a great album cover as an example of that whole new era, which Ireland really helped pioneer. The idea, I think the word is underground, where groups didn't look in any way. They looked detached. They looked hairy. They didn't look particularly as though they wanted to be seen to be commercial. And Ireland really helped develop that idea, didn't they?
I think that's fair to say. I think the amount of time that was spent on cover art was, I mean, everybody that you speak to, from CB to Tim Clark to David to all of the people who were there at that time, there was tremendous care and attention to detail to the album covers. I mean, even down to logos. You've got that kind of rope logo,
yeah,
the Spookies.
I'm going to go to one that's rather controversially discussed in the book here.
And David and I disagree about this because Chris Blackwell said it was one of the worst covers ever.
I think it's David Betteridge that says it's terrible.
Or David Betteridge. And you say, Dave, you think it's fantastic?
It's just, I can remember being in a record shop in York when this record came out.
We should say, by the way, this is Bloodwind Pigs, A Head Rings Out. If you're listening rather than watching.
Yeah.
And describe, Neil, very quickly, how they got that image, which involves going to a butcher's shop, doesn't it?
Well, I was lucky enough. I never imagined I'd actually speak to Chris Wright. But anyway, what with one thing and another, I got hold of him and he agreed to sit and chat. So we did a kind of similar thing to what we're doing now. And he said, look, right at the beginning, he said, my memory's not great, but I'll do my best. So can we start with an easy question? So I said, well, okay. Chris Blackwell believes that the Bloodwind Pig album cover is probably one of the worst that Ireland ever put out. And he was a bit taken aback by that. And he said, well, actually, it's all my fault. So I said, oh, really? How's that? And he said, well, you got to remember in those days that I was kind of wandering around the West End wearing a caftan and beads and all of that kind of malarkey. And the members of The Pig appeared in the office and said, this is the album cover we want. And it begins with a pig's head. Can you go and get one? So somewhat, I suppose, taken aback, he says, yeah, okay, fine. He finds a butcher's. I mean, you've got to picture this because we're now in 2024. This is 1969. In 2024, I don't believe anything like this would happen. But he marches in, so he says, into this butcher shop in the middle of Soho and says, have you got any pig's heads?
Your finest pig's head, sir.
Yes. You can just kind of imagine it, can't you? Anyway, so somewhat taken aback, the butcher says, actually, yes, we do have one. Produces it, puts it in a plastic carrier bag. He walks back to the office, puts it on the table. They prop it up. Somebody rolls a joint. They stuck the joint in its mouth, put a pair of headphones on, put a pair of dark glasses on, and the photographer takes a picture.
And there's your cover.
There's your cover.
Well, I can remember being in a record shop in York when this was playing over the PA. And somebody said, what's this? He said, I can well remember, it's Mick Abraham's band, Bloodwind Pig. And they held up the cover. And we all just went, yeah. We all just nodded. Yeah, because the reason it worked was it wasn't like an album cover. You know what I mean? And that was kind of half the battle at that time, because you'd come out of the 60s where most album covers had been done by a record company kind of publicity departments, they've just been cranked out. Whereas
Absolutely.
this sort of thing looked like it was a message from the band. You know what I mean? So although
it did, but you could argue that the great covers are ones that somehow kind of elevate your feelings about the music.
Well, okay.
But instead it got your attention.
Yeah, well, that, the point you just made probably takes us on to the next thing we should talk about, which is you tell the story of one of my favourite covers, which is Fairport Convention's Unhalfbricking, which is an extraordinary little story about the serendipitous approach to things in those days. Tell us that story, Neil.
That indeed. It's also from memory, I think it's only the second Island album cover that doesn't have the name of the band on the front. It's just a picture, and it's a picture of Sandy Doney's parents standing in front of the gate to their Wimbledon home. You can see the church in the background.
Yeah.
And what happened was that they got the album title, if I remember rightly, which was Unhalfbricking, but nobody could think of what they could do for a cover. So Sandy, they're all driving around in the van with Eric Hayes, who's the photographer, who's a Canadian, who'd kind of befriended them. And Sandy eventually said, look, why don't we just turn up to my parents and we'll have a cup of tea with them, and, maybe something, will happen. Maybe it's kind of one of those moments where something might or might not happen. And Eric started taking pictures of them, and at one point he managed to frame it whereby everybody was in. You can see the lattice work of the fence.
Yes, it's incredible.
And then Sandy's parents came out through the gate to basically see what was happening, and he positioned them with the band in the same placing as he had them, and that's how the album cover came about.
So there's no art director, there's no stylist, there's nobody who's got a sketch or anything. And also Eric Hayes, I think I'm right in saying he's 23 years old, isn't he? Something like that.
No, I think he was 21 at the time.
He got married to his girlfriend on the way from Canada.
They got married
via
in India. Yeah, indeed. And he just turned up with a camera in London, started hanging out at the various clubs that, Middle Earth, where people were playing, started befriending groups, and that's how that one came about.
It's just lovely.
And also the picture on the back, I don't know if it's in here. Yes, it is.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see that. He also took afterwards. They sat down to tea, didn't they? And
they sat down early supper with Sandy's mum and dad, and everybody. I must admit, I did when I bought the record. I thought, well, that must have been where Sandy's parents sat when they were all sitting there having their early supper. It wasn't. It was actually Eric and his new wife, and that was the two places which are laid. And he saw that as another great graphic image, moved away, and they kept talking, and that was it.
And the wonderful thing about that is that everything about it was spontaneous, wasn't it? It was just just made it up on the hoof. If they didn't get up in the morning with some fixed idea, and they've come up with something that, I've read articles that refer to that picture as part of a kind of a frame of timeless English pictures alongside sort of Gainsborough and things like that, which I think is really lovely, actually. I love that.
I'm not sure that I'd put it alongside Gainsborough, but it's just a very clever cover. It's very of its time. It's very Fairport. It's not kind of planned as, let's do this as a cover. It's a bit like, think back to what we did on our holidays, which was the previous album, which was a photograph of a drawing that they'd all done while bored, waiting to go on stage in Norwich on a blackboard.
Yeah.
We'd have done that as a cover, but that's how it worked.
Well, we were going to move on to, actually, I've just dug my copy up to demonstrate to anybody watching.
Very
Jethro
good.
Tull do indeed stand up.
Wow.
And the cover of the thing. And there's a lovely bit. I always thought this was an extraordinary cover, and it was a huge commercial success and a big earner for Ireland, and subsidised a lot of these kind of bands on the fringes, I think. But what's interesting is you say that the original copies of that were hand done, weren't they? People hand glued the central section.
Yeah, absolutely. They were hand glued. And then they realised that was a number one album. It was the first Island number one album, and it was selling what's the proverbial word, like shit off a shovel. I mean, it was really,
Yeah.
really selling quick. And so Claude Day, who was the guy who owned E.J. Day, who, believe it or not, was a fighter pilot in the war, but he was an inventor. So he invented a gadget, that's the best way of explaining it, to basically do the cutout and glue it at the same time so it didn't fall off. I mean,
It's extraordinary.
again, it's almost inconceivable to think of it happening that way. But yes, they were the original copies, and yours looks like an original, just like mine is.
It is. And I'd forgotten just how hip they were at the time, Jethro Tull.
Oh,
Jazz, Bach, everything about them. And very soon they became almost completely opposite, really. But at the time, they were one of the, there they were on the rock and roll circus with John Lennon. Extraordinary, really.
I know. But do you also know that I can't remember which of the cutouts it is, but Ian Anderson actually has 11 fingers.
He has 11 fingers on the cover.
Yeah.
If you count the fingers, he has 11, which
And apparently how that came about was that the guy who did the woodcut, his name is James Grasso, just got distracted and didn't kind of go back and just left it at that.
Thought, well, no one will notice. And here we are.
Well, but probably
55
people,
years
and
later.
if you think of it this way, that people are sitting there, they've rolled a joint, they're having a listen to the record, and they go, hold on a minute, how come he's got 11 fingers? And there's big
strong
debate
stuff.
about it.
Yeah, wow.
So what were we going to talk about? Oh, the Nick Drake. I wanted to say, there's the Nick Drake cover that Dave's just turned up. And I thought it was interesting. You ran a press release.
Yes.
With all these things, there are all sorts of bits of ephemera. And this was so interesting. And I was thinking, I wonder how you would market Nick Drake today. Because there, they say the key things about Nick Drake was he doesn't have a telephone.
Yes.
He has a habit of disappearing for 4 days at a time. He loves classical music. He read English at Cambridge University, and he hitchhiked around Europe. That's how and he had to come home early for health reasons. That is how they sell Nick Drake. It's extraordinary, really.
It really is. It's what can you? I mean, Nick's the anniversary of his death was a couple of days ago. So there's lots of sort of media about Nick and stuff. I mean, the thing that within all of that bit about Nick, the thing that really resonates for me was talking to Ben Laycock. Ben was a chum of Nick's, or Ben and his now wife, Rosie, were. And many, 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 many years after, it's odd actually, I woke up this morning thinking about this. Many, many years later, I think they were in Scotland somewhere, and they went out to a wine shop to get some wine before they sat down and had their evening meal, and walked into the wine shop, and there was Nick. It was Time Has Told Me or something like that playing, and they went, oh, amazing, that's Nick playing. You don't kind of hear it very often, because in these days he hadn't got to this huge kind of level of fame that he has now. And the girl behind the counter, who was young, said, oh, how do you know that's Nick Drake? And they explained that they were friends. And that's to me, in all of that written stuff about Nick, that's the bit that I find very, very moving indeed.
What are we doing next, Mark?
Well, we were going to do King Crimson. Dave and I have got a thing about this record, because in the court of the Crimson King, when it came out in 1969, when I was 15, I think, I can really remember that, because it had, and presumably this is the second example of the record by Island Records with no mention of the band or the name of the record on the sleeve.
Third one, because the first one was the second Traffic album.
Oh yes, of course,
had the logo on.
Yeah, but I remember seeing that in record shop windows and just thinking you had to go and find out what it was, because it was it's one of those rare examples where a cover really got people excited. But looking at it now, it's the amazing cartoon crimson face with the bulging eyes, and that was it was a big part of the Island story, wasn't it?
I mean, I think all of us, shall we say, of a certain age can remember the first time you heard that. And it was either you heard Schizoid Man, which basically scared the wits out of you, or it was actually the title track. And I remember personally it was the title track, and I'd never heard a mellotron before. No. And then suddenly it was like this these amazing sweeps of almost kind of orchestral music. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. There's certain things that I describe through my life, and I don't know whether you guys do, but when you hear it for the first time, it's like hearing music from outer space. You know, I mean, the ultimately, when next book will include Catch a Fire, and it's the first track, Concrete Jungle. I remember the first time I heard that, it was exactly that same feeling. This was a music that I'd never, ever heard before. Hearing King Crimson, it was something you'd never, ever heard before, totally out there.
But it made you feel that, I did, and so many others did too, that Ireland somehow, you had such faith in the whole aesthetic, the music they produced, the way the records looked, that I kind of routinely bought anything really that was on the Island Records label, because I kind of felt it was going to be all right, you know.
Well,
and I don't remember that being any other label having quite that effect, actually.
No, I was exactly the same, for what it's worth. I mean, it literally was, if it had that pink label at that time, then you invested in it.
Yeah.
You know, it had that mark of quality, if you like. And, you know, I remember CB has said, you know, whenever he saw a record, when he was trudging around record shops, buying records to take back to Jamaica in the early days, anything with Atlantic on it, he'd pick it up.
Yeah, no.
Absolutely.
It's the same kind of thing.
I think Dave's got John Barleycorn by Traffic up there, and that was another big part of the island folklore. The whole idea of Traffic going to Aston Tyrrold, the cottage that I think they got through a connection of Chris Blackwell's actually, and getting it together in the country, and that was a big part of the island folklore, wasn't it?
Oh, I mean, yeah, the getting it together in the country. There was them up at Blueberry, Aston Tyrrold, and the Downs. Then there was the Spookies down the road, just outside Thiel at Woolwich Green Farm, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, you had other bands from other labels. Heron was one I can remember, who decamped to somewhere. Bronco, you'll come to later in this book, they decamped to, where was it, somewhere in Worcestershire. You know, it just kind of happened like that. I mean, the key to John Barleycorn was actually Chris Wood, without a shadow of a doubt. He was the one who introduced and played them the track, John Barleycorn Must Die, from a Waterstones album, which Dave's left hand is sitting on right now, and Frost and Fire. And it was only after he'd played it to them, I think, from what Anna Capaldi says, the third or fourth time did they actually figure out what it was and why that then became the linchpin to the album. And that was the first of the two key albums that were beginning to break traffic in America. The second one, obviously, was Low Spark.
Right.
And there, if you go back a page, Dave.
Go on.
No, forward one. Now, on the left there, that is Anna Capaldi's original lyric sheet, or rather, it's Jim's lyric sheet. And that would have been typed out. We worked this out. That would have been typed out from listening to Woody's copy of the record. And that's what they used for the, you know, the crib sheet for the song.
So you're lucky in your researches. You come across certain people who've kept loads of things.
That Anna told me that was kept. That was she found that in the bottom of a drawer under a whole load of clothes.
Right.
Just sat there. You know, in the same way. I mean, some of the stuff I've got in my own archive sat in brown envelopes. The picture you've just gone past of Jim and Chris and Steve, which is a Dick Perlak picture, taken just outside the cottage. I found that in a skip at the back of Ireland. Put it in an envelope, and it's moved house with me. And you know, when we began doing what we're doing now, I thought, I wonder if I've got that still, and I did. Thank goodness.
We were going to have a quick word about the compilation albums, Mark, weren't we?
We were, because they were a big thing, but Nice Enough to Eat we'll come to second, actually, but we were going to talk about You Can All Join In, because these were absolutely life-changing for me. And it's really interesting reading your account of the story of the photo shoot of You Can All Join In. So just tell us that story briefly, where they decided they would get the whole label together.
So we're looking at the picture now. I think they're assembled in Hyde Park, aren't they, or something?
Well, believe it or not, that picture was taken by Aubrey or Poe Powell.
Poe Powell.
Yes, it was.
Everybody knows far better for being the co-founder of Hypnosis and therefore Pink Floyd sleeves. That was one of the first sleeves he ever did. Guy Stevens got him to do it. Originally, it was going to be in a studio. Then they decided that they couldn't afford that. So Poe said, okay, well, how about if we do it on the edge of Hyde Park? And it was shot just by Speaker's Corner. There are certain people who didn't turn up in time because they got stoned on the way to it. Kelly and Greg Ridley, notable amongst them from the Spookies. Contrary to popular belief, it was not meant to be a double, like a gatefold cover. It was just that one shot. The only picture that survives is that one. The reel was lost. Poe told me that he had time enough to shoot a roll of 2 1/4 film, and then everybody mutinied.
But it's just extraordinary. They mostly went to the Speakeasy because they couldn't get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They had to meet at 6 in the morning. So all of them had been up all night, hadn't they?
Most of them had. Kelly remembers the fact that they would have had alarm clocks everywhere to get Steve and Chris Wood up. Whether they came in from Berkshire or not, I don't know. Nobody can remember stuff like that. CB remembers them all turning up in the office later that morning because it was wages day.
Oh, they all get their wages.
That's how you know it's a Friday.
And you even have an account of how much wages they got. I think it was Nirvana and Spooky Tooth got £30 each a week, but Traffic got more. We're not talking about more. But the other extraordinary thing about that picture is having got, this is just so 1969, isn't it? Having got all those people together at 6 o'clock in the morning, nobody's worked out that you've got to get them into a certain shape whereby you can get them all on the cover. And there's a whole lot of people who turned up on that day and were in the picture and are cut out of the cover.
Slightly cut out, and also you have Ian A. Anderson as opposed to Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull.
I think that's Ian A. Anderson, isn't it?
That's the guy with the beard, the kind of beatnik. Yeah.
But then you have the better known Ian Anderson at the back there, do you?
You do, but the thing was that at that time that album cover was shot, Ian A. Anderson's blues band, his record was going to be represented on that album.
Yes, of course.
He got dropped for varying reasons.
But he's still on the cover.
But he's still on the
because
cover.
They couldn't. But there's a reason here. They couldn't reshoot the cover because Traffic then broke up. So you have Steve. He went off to Amsterdam with Dick Polak. This is just as Blind Faith then formed. You have Dave Mason coming back from America. You're not going to end up with them in the same room, and hence it couldn't be reshot.
And there's no Photoshop in those days, clearly. There's no jiggery-pokery of that nature. And the other one is, of course, Nice Enough to Eat, which I think was 14 and 6, wasn't it, when it first came out?
I think it was 4. That's my memory of it.
My copy has still got 14 and 6 sticker on the front, I'm sure it is.
That's how I discovered Nick Drake. In fact, that's how I discovered quite a lot of stuff, actually.
I think
also
it's
Heavy Jelly and Dr. Strangely Strange. But more importantly, Nick Drake.
No, but listen, Heavy Jelly, how good is that? I played that the other day. It's phenomenal.
It's really
phenomenal.
Good. Actually, it's Dr. Strangely Strange.
Guy Stevens. Pure Guy Stevens.
But
go on.
So go on.
What are you going to say, Mark?
I was just going to say that Ireland were real, again, pioneers of that whole idea of the compilation, and they were huge successes, weren't they? And really helped the catalogues of all the records that the bands that they were on.
What it did was two things. One, it introduced new acts, like you just said, Nick Drake, for example. It's on a compilation with King Crimson and Traffic and whatever else. And so if you're a fan of that, you've not heard this particular King Crimson track or whatever it is. So you buy the record, and then by that, it almost osmotically, you're introduced to these other acts. Very clever idea.
So there it is. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of work, Neil. I mean, as was the previous volume. And I've just sat here. I had to put it on a stout table to,
3.75 kilograms. You
can't curl up in a chair with it because it'll flatten out your
crush your rib cage,
your privates. But you've got to put it on a stout table, and you sit there with a cup of tea, and you just find yourself wandering into the world of heavy jelly or whatever, and reminding yourself about members of Fairport Convention that you've forgotten about or whatever. And it has that commitment to detail, which is so important with these things. And it can only have been put together by somebody who kind of remembers it as it happened, So it's not a dry work of, let's go into the archives. It's animated by the memories of somebody who was there. So what's the next one then?
Next one is 1971 to 1972. And that brings us through with, Roxy music. I mean,
of course.
I'm trying to think of everything else. That's my mind is kind of, it's a strange thing. It's part in this one and it's partly in the next one. So, we got to have Head, Hands and Feet. We have Roxy music. We have Sparks. We have the unreleased Jess Roden album. I'm trying to think of the other ones. But there's some interesting stuff because in amongst all of the records, we also go into the world of Basing Street, the world of Chrysalis and all the other sort of little bits that were going on at the same time.
Good.
It's a
the story of Basing Street is
work.
very important indeed.
Well, and you're doing all the interviews as well and collecting most of that material?
The majority of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be lovely for, to have some help and maybe in time that might occur. I don't know. But yeah, at the moment, it's just the two of us. It's Jane and myself. She designs and I do the heavy lifting.
So and the next one's out, what, in about a year's time?
No. Oh, please, no.
No.
Our lovely people at Manchester University Press, Emma has said, no, you can have until April 2026. You can have a bit of a rest. I mean, these things, they take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and also with a lot of people, it's far better to talk to them face to face than ever it is. I mean, Zoom works really well. We're doing it now. Telephone's not so good. But personally, I much prefer to talk to someone face to face. You get miles more out of them.
Yeah. Well, it's been brilliant talking to you, Neil, and it's a fantastic book. We could not recommend it more.
Absolutely.
More highly. It's just adorable.
It's
so
as good as a womble, by the way. Did you know that?
It's as good as what?
It's as good as a womble.
All right.
I'll explain. We were lucky enough to be, Neil McCormick does a roundup of the best books of 2024.
Oh, right, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And we're listed in that, which is really nice. So Emma at MUP rang me the other day and said, do you realise that you're in amongst books like Mike Batt's book?
Yes, of course.
Oh, really? And she said, well, that makes the IBOR as good as a womble.
Right, there you go.
And I'll take that.
No higher praise.
No,
I think.
Wonderful to see you, Neil. And we'll obviously talk to you when the next one's out, if not before. Lovely to see you. Thanks.
Cheers.